If you want your watercolor style illustrations to have more depth while still keeping that soft, transparent look, this video is for you. Today, I'm sharing 4 different ways I deepen colors in digital watercolor using this strawberry painting as an example. Each method gives you a different kind of control depending on what the painting needs. Before we get started, I've also linked my free watercolor strawberry drawing guide in the description below, in case if you'd like to take a closer look at my full drawing process. Before we get into the different methods to create depths, I want to quickly talk about why these matter so much in watercolor. One of the reasons watercolor looks so beautiful is because it feels light, soft, and transparent. If you look at great watercolor paintings, the colors usually have that airy, soft feeling to them. But because of that, when you first start a painting, the colors can look very light. If you look at this strawberry, for example, the colors at the beginning are actually pretty light. And if I turn on the later layers one by one, you can see how the colors gradually builds up. As that happens, the strawberry starts to feel more solid and more three-dimensional. So in a watercolor style, learning how to build up your color is really important. That's how you start creating form, shadows, and depths, while still keeping that soft watercolor feel. So with that in mind, let's get into the different ways you can do that. The very first method is very simple and honestly very useful. This method works best with watercolor brushes that have some transparency to them. If you are one of my membership students and you've bought my brush set, a lot of my watercolor brushes already have that transparent watercolor feel built in. And what that means is, when you paint one stroke, the color doesn't go down as a completely solid block of color. It has some transparency to it. And if you paint over the same area again, the color naturally starts to build up and become deeper. That's really what I mean when I say a brush has transparency. One stroke looks light, and then when you layer more on top, the color gets deeper in a very natural way. And if you don't have my brushes, in Procreate's built-in brushes, Tinderbox can give you a very similar feeling. However, you will need to set the brush opacity to around 50%. So with this kind of brush, one very easy way to deepen the overall color is to simply duplicate the layer after you've painted it. And now let me show you a real example from my painting process. You see here I already used a brush that has some transparency to lay in the base colors, but because of that, the first layer of the base colors often come out a little too light. So a lot of the time, after I finish that first layer of local colors, I will just duplicate the layers once, and that immediately deepens the overall colors. It's a really simple trick, but it works so well because it keeps that transparent watercolor feel while giving you a strong base to build on. The second method also relies on brush transparency, but this time in a more targeted way. Instead of duplicating the whole layer, you can deepen the color simply by painting over the same area again. Because these brushes have transparency, one stroke gives you a soft layer of color, and when you paint over that same spot again, the color naturally gets deeper. So in a way, it's doing the same thing as duplicating the layer, but just in one area that needs it. And this is one of the beautiful things about watercolor. You don't always need to jump to a darker color right away. Sometimes the most natural result comes from gradually building up the same color. I use this a lot when I want to deepen certain parts of the form. For example, in the membership tutorial, when I'm painting the tiny bumps and dips around the strawberry seeds, I'm using darker color to show that those areas think a little. Sometimes after one stroke, I still feel like it's not deep enough, so I will just go over the same area again. And here's another example. Near the end of the tutorial, when I'm painting the shadow cast by the green leaves onto the strawberry, I sometimes feel that the first shadow isn't dark enough. That's totally okay. I simply go over the same spot again on the same layer with the same brush, and the color becomes deeper. Method 3. Adding depths with a multiply layer. This is a very common and really useful way to add depths in digital watercolor. What makes it so helpful is that a multiply layer naturally darkens the color for you. So when you paint on this layer, the color immediately starts to interacting with the layers underneath in a deeper, richer way. Because of that, you can build stronger shadows and richer color variation without having to work too hard to find a darker color every time. For example, in the tutorial, I use this method when I'm painting some of the deepest reds in the strawberry. These darker reds sit in the little recessed area around the seeds, where the foam turns away from the light. So in that part, I go straight onto a multiply layer to deepen those colors. For me, this is really helpful when I want to push the depths a little further than normal brush layering can. Regular brush layering is soft and gradual, which is beautiful, but multiply gives me a stronger result a bit more quickly. So if I want certain dark red areas to feel richer, deeper, and a little juicier, this is often the method I use. The last method is a little more advanced, because this is where you start taking more control over exactly how deep the color becomes. Instead of only relying on transparent buildup or a multiply layer, you can also choose a dark color directly. The key is that you don't have to use that dark color at full strength, you can control it with brush opacity. This is really helpful when you know an area needs to be darker, but you still want the result to stay soft. Because a dark color goes down too heavily and too quickly, it can start to feel harsh and the watercolor softness begins to disappear. But when you lower the brush opacity, even a darker color can still be applied in a soft and controlled way. So you're not just choosing the color, you're also choosing how strongly that color appears. I use this method more when I want to shape the form in a more specific way. For example, around 27 minutes in the tutorial, when I want to push the roundness of the strawberry a little more, I use a higher brush opacity around the light to shadow transition area so that that area becomes deeper. But when I deepen the upper left side, which is closer to the light, I lower the brush opacity so the color stays soft there. So the closer an area is to the light, the more gently I deepen it. And when I need a stronger shadow, I raise the opacity. You can also see this method works together with brushstroke layering. It's really just a more controlled way of building depths. So these are the 4 ways to create depths in watercolor style painting. I hope this gives you a clearer way to think about building depths. And if you want to keep growing into an artist who can draw what you truly want to draw, whether that comes from what you see or what you imagine, you can explore my drawing membership. My goal there isn't just to have you copy my steps. I walk you through my thought process and explain why I make certain choices so you can gradually build your own understanding, confidence, and independence as an artist. Thank you for watching today. I will see you in my next video.